I am very excited about this afternoon's plenary session. It's going to be an opportunity to really process some of the key themes and content that we've talked about through the course of the day with four very distinguished panelists who I think can speak to these issues from a number of different perspectives. But before we get into the panel discussion, I want to introduce a sponsor who's an important sponsor of the leagues, who's helping make sure that this panel session is possible. Hub International Insurance. And I want to give Gary Clark, Senior Vice President of Hub, an opportunity to come up and just say a couple of words. Gary?
Hey everybody, you've all heard me blab enough over the years, so I'm going to keep it pretty short. But I want you to know that Hub International has built a charter school practice that we operate here out of Denver, Colorado. And we've been partnered with charter schools here in Colorado for 10 years now. We know what we're doing, we know this space, we know the challenges that you face. And I'd like to mention a couple of those specifically just to kind of get your wheels turning in regard to some of the things that you might think about when you think about Hub. First one, really quick, is the total compensation bucket that you have at your charter school to compensate your employees. You know what I'm talking about, and you know that the struggles that you face as salaries continue to push upward, but your PPR may stay relatively flat or may not keep pace with the increases that you want to give. So thrown into that mess that you're already dealing with is the ugliness of health insurance. And I have heard people for so many years tell me that you give somebody a pay raise, but then you take it right back with the health insurance increase. And I want you to know that as an organization of charter schools, we're working on solutions that can be long-term fixes for the rising costs of health insurance here in Colorado. The other thing that I want to talk to you about really quickly before I get the hook here is the question of risk management. One of the things that Hub International does is we sell commercial insurance policies to protect you if your organization screws up. But what you really want to do is put practices and policies in place so that you don't screw up, so that you don't incur that liability. We've had charter schools that have written six-figure checks in the state of Colorado to settle deals that could have been avoided by better risk mitigation. So those are a couple of the things that we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. at our session. We'd love to have you join us if you'd like to learn about a little bit more. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for letting us host, and I hope that you enjoy this panel discussion. Thank you.
This panel is a great way to finish out the day. After this, we're going to be transitioning between 5:10 and 5:15 p.m. to a reception. So we're going to be going out to the atrium to enjoy good food and drinks and celebrate a day well done. Before we do that, I am going to, at the end of the session, give my colleague Dan Schaller, who's our Director of Governmental Affairs, an opportunity to come up with and talk with you a little bit about a special advocacy initiative that we're advancing right now. So with that, let's get into this. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves for just 3 minutes. And after that, I'm going to tee up our topic. Let's start with Jason Gaulden.
Sure. I'll make my introduction quick and yield the rest of my time to someone more worthy. My name is Jason Gaulden. I'm the Vice President of Partnerships at America Succeeds. It's a national coalition of business leaders specifically focused on improving the education system. And I've been in this work for a long time from various perspectives, working with schools, working at the board level, sitting in the seat of a funder at a couple of different large foundations. And so I've seen the charter movement over the years from many angles, and I'm happy to be here and share my perspective with my esteemed colleagues on the panel. So thanks for having me.
My name is Nora Flood. I am the Education Director for James Walton, and as of a year ago, and before that was able to serve at the league for, I think, almost 9 years, something like that. But I still think of myself as a teacher. I was a teacher and a principal for 30 years before that in traditional public, private, charter, and international schools, and so still think like a teacher and walk and talk like a teacher, but I have a new opportunity.
Hi, my name is Croy Lewis, and I had the privilege of working with Nora for a couple years at the league. I have been in the Colorado Charter School movement for about 21 years. Just had the opportunity to go to the fundraiser and celebration, the 20-year celebration of Platte River Academy, which was the first school that I helped start, and way back when, in the movement, when it was a very different movement. Have been a board member, a founder, a school leader, and had the privilege of working in district-authorized charter schools as well as a CSI-authorized charter school. And now I am at a CSI. I'm the executive director of CSI, and I get to work with many schools. We have about 41 schools and serving about 17,000 students. So thanks for letting me be here.
Good afternoon. My name's Jim Goenner, and I've got a special advantage over my three colleagues, and that is I don't live in Colorado. So I also have an incentive, and that is Ben told me if I wanted a drink at the reception, I had to say something provocative. So I may need your help in being provocative, but I currently lead the National Charter Schools Institute. We're a nonprofit organization that works across the country helping schools and boards and authorizers implement the charter idea well. Been doing this work since 1995, where I led Central Michigan University's charter school operations in the authorizing world, helped start Michigan's version of the league called the Michigan Association of Public School Academies, and also the Michigan version of CACSA, which is the authorizers in the state, and then also worked to help found the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. So I've been privileged to be able to do this work at multiple levels, both state and nationally, and thrilled to be here with you today.
About 2 weeks ago, these panelists received a 16-page copy of the League's vision, which I shared with you in an opening address about 3 hours ago. So they've had 2 weeks to mull it over, and now we're going to ask them for insights on it. To tee up this discussion, what I want to do is I want to lay out some of the very real threats, weaknesses that we're facing as a movement as we seek to realize a larger vision of impact here in Colorado. At the charter movement's left flank, we're experiencing fierce opposition from organizations seeking to protect the status quo. These organizations are mounting new attacks, such as the NAACP's call for a moratorium on charter schools, recent claims that charter schools are privatizing education and creaming the best students out of districts, and our campaigns last fall to elect anti-charter school board members to a number of Denver metropolitan districts. Even though we have 83,000 students in our state alone confined in chronically low-performing schools, these forces would like to assert that charter schools have saturated our city centers, so we should stop charter school growth. At the charter movement's right flank, we're facing the prospect that, for the first time in 27 years, public charter schools could be lumped together with vouchers, tax credits, and education scholarship accounts as an attempt to dismantle public education in favor of private school choice. I don't know about you, but as a native Minnesotan who knows why the first charter school law was passed in Minnesota in 1991, I didn't ever anticipate until recently that charter schools would be equated with voucher programs to the extent that seems possible now. And finally, within the charter movement itself, we're experiencing the threats of mixed authorizing practices, mixed school quality, and finally the threat that our opponents could use terrible scandals by a few bad actors to try and condemn the entire movement. So, within that mix, we're talking about a new, vibrant vision for the charter sector. We're going to have 40 minutes in which I'm going to be posing questions to each of the panelists. We're going to be going round robin, and it's going to be kind of fluid. Not every panelist is necessarily going to get the same question, although we'll give them a chance to get in the mix if they want to get their elbows a little bit dirty. And then after that, we're going to open it up to an audience Q&A. We're going to use 2 mics that we're going to float around the room, give people the opportunity to directly ask questions of our panelists for 20 minutes before we go to reception. So that's the game plan. Let's move on it. The first question, this one's to Nora. What do you make of the vision that the league has laid out after conducting 4 months of market research? Did anything surprise you, especially as my predecessor here as president of the Colorado League?
First of all, congratulations on it. I thought, honestly, it was a really great vision and document as we go into the second 25 years of the charter school movement in Colorado. I think there are 2 parts that I think are very related that it didn't surprise me because it's been out in the ether, but I was very, very pleased to see you call out. And one is redefining quality in our charter school sector. I think we've talked about it for a long time. I think we have a very narrow vision of what quality in our schools means. We are mission-driven organizations, and I think we should be given credit for the missions that we are seeking to serve our families and our kids. And so I think that calling out this idea of redefining or expanding the quality definition, I think is spot on. And I think it's timely, and I think we're riding a wave. We're not the only ones talking about this. And I think from the inception of charter schools 25 years ago in Colorado, I think that's been one of the things. We've been sometimes our own worst enemy, because I don't think we talk enough about we don't celebrate enough the things that we do for our kids and families. And then aligned with that was the idea of drawing more diversity into our charter schools, and I think in teachers and leaders, to be sure, but also across the board with students and families as well. And I think those 2 actually go together, because I think if we expand the idea of quality within our charter school sector, we are going to draw more like-minded people into our sector. So I think we're going to draw more diversity if we can celebrate what we do well as mission-driven organizations.
Thank you, Nora. That was very kind. Let me take that same question over to Jim Goenner, who has a national perspective on this. Jim, you've seen a lot of different visions come and go over the years in different states around the country, and you've watched the charter movement proceed through some different phases in its development. What did you make of the vision that we laid out, and did anything surprise you?
That's a big question. Answer it with several points. So number 1, I just love imagine the possibilities, because you know the greatest nation in the world is imagination. Right? Imagination is so powerful.
I think they got it, Jim.
All right.
He was trying to get that free drink for being provocative.
But in all seriousness, if we repeat what we've done the first 25 years, the next 25 years, we've failed. And we've done some great work the first 25 years. But the first 25 years were a different time, a different day, a different set of expectations for where we've come and for where we can go and for where we can imagine. The next 25 years is going to require some courage and some energy, some new players. And that's what I see in the 4-part plan. It's not one single focus, and it's not just a focus on charter schools. It's beyond. It's how do you improve the dynamics of an entire state. And to me, that's spot on, because the original charter idea was really thought of as a verb, not a noun. The schools are super important. It's the outcome. It's where the students interact. But chartering is really an idea, much like the American idea. And one of the things that John Adams said about the American Revolution is that the real revolution was in the hearts and minds of the people. And a lot of us come to this thinking we're part of a movement, and part of the real revolution of the movement is what's in the hearts and minds of the people and what they're going to bring to it the next 25 years.
Okay, now we're going to get into what was missing from the vision. I want to turn to Terry Croy Lewis for that. Terry's the head of a statewide authorizer and has a pretty discriminating view of authorizing practice here in Colorado. Terry, do you have thoughts on what was missing or what remains to be fleshed out in the vision that we laid out today?
Well, when I was reading it, I didn't see CSI written anywhere. In fact, I wrote that in my notes. Where's CSI? You were talking about authorizing. Yeah, I mean, I think we're always going to be focused as authorizers on how to become better. And I think the league struggles with what does that look like for their involvement. And I know my time at the league, I felt that way, that we provided support and resources to authorizers. But at the same time, is that in conflict with the work that you're doing with charters? Is it, are you taking sides? And so the challenge for the league, I think, is to try to find how to straddle that. For us as authorizers, we have come together, we formed the Colorado Association of Charter School Authorizers at the state level, trying to work together to share best practices. As CSI is supposed to, by statute, required to be a model authorizer, it's important for us that we are working with other authorizers. But as we look to the league's vision, I guess the question is, how can you manage that? How do you straddle how to be a good support resource for authorizers? I remember sitting at the league office, in my league office, and getting a phone call from a small authorizer on the Eastern Plains. And he said, it was a superintendent, said, well, how do I do authorizing? What are my expectations? What are the roles and responsibilities that I have? And that was before I was as familiar as I am now, and I often felt like I didn't have the answers for him. And then I talked to an authorizer that was in the mountainous area, and they said, same thing, how do I become a better authorizer? So I think the league will struggle with how to do that, how to provide those resources, and yet also provide support for schools, and putting that first and foremost. And so I think that, as you move forward, is something to wrestle with, and I'd be happy to have more CSI written on your strategic plan and how we can help with that.
I'm pretty sure there's no mention of Denver Public Schools, Jeffco,
Well, we are special.
Aurora,
We're the
or
state.
anyone else who's
Yeah.
an authorizer in the plan either.
I know, we are asking for something.
Terry, demanding special
Yeah,
treatment.
Yeah.
Jason, what would you emphasize as key for the charter movement to have a greater impact on public education in Colorado than it is right now?
Sure, I can take a crack at that. My initial instinct on how to answer that question is twofold. I'll make 2 points. The second point I want to make is inherent conflict. Don't let me forget that while I'm making my first point, okay? The first point that I would make is stakeholder engagement, right? So as far as we've come, having demonstrated the value of charter schools, the numbers speak for themselves in terms of performance. In 2000 and I can't remember if the data is 16 or 17, 7 of the top 10 performing charter schools based on SAT results of graduating seniors were charter schools. The results really do speak for themselves, but how do you scale that? How do you increase that? That's with stakeholder engagement, and that happens at multiple levels. That happens with the league and the great work that they do under the state capitol dome, educating and influencing policymakers. But a big part of that I think may be a bit of a missing link is parent engagement. And that's a struggle for every advocacy issue, is how to get kind of their grassroots engaged, mobilized, and motivated. But I think that the charter sector in Colorado, representing thousands and thousands of families and with 13% of the market, that is some serious parent power that I think needs to be bolstered, needs to be strengthened, and needs to be activated in ways that create the conditions for more success. I agree with Jim. If we do the same thing in the next 25 years as we've done in the last, we failed, because the world is changing at a rapid pace, and schools have to be innovative in keeping up with that to prepare kids for success. So I would say stakeholder engagement, and particularly utilizing and activating parent power. Inherent conflict.
This is Jason's way of giving two answers.
Well, it worked. Listen, inherent conflict. The league's great challenge is this. They represent all of their members, and essentially all charter schools in Colorado are members of the league. That's a beautiful thing. The problem is that all charter schools are not built the same, and there are varying levels of quality. So how does the league take on the quality issue, which is a potent point in its strategic plan, is to address the quality issue, but these are also members you serve, hence rock and a hard place, catch-22, inherent conflict. So I don't have the answers to that, but I am going to be keeping a close watch, because I've been making this case for years that the state associations have to stand up and lead on the quality issue, even when that means addressing difficult issues amongst their own ranks. And so that is an issue that the league faces, but I trust that the leadership will face it with courage, conviction, and success.
Wow, what a nice ending. Terry, I'm going to come back to you with this next question. What strengths do you believe that the Colorado Charter Movement brings to achieving the vision that we've set forth? Do you think we can succeed?
Well, of course. As Jim and I were just talking, I am the eternal optimist. We can succeed, and we've had such great successes. We have to think of this new generation of charters. For those of us that have been in the field for a long time, we see things changing, and that's a natural evolution. Things are changing politically, but if you've been around long enough, you just see this, that we've kind of cycled back. I worry about the political changes. I worry about how that's going to impact our charters. I worry about if we are losing our passion about charters. When I spoke at a fundraiser recently, as the one I just referred to at Platte River Academy, I talked to parents that have taken this for granted. They've taken the charter for granted. It's just a neighborhood school for them. It's one that they hope that they can get into. But they didn't stop to think what it took for us to come to this point. And that we have to always be on our guard in terms of moving forward. So can we be successful? Absolutely. But can we let our guard down? Absolutely not. When we meet with legislators and we talk about charters, we hear the same thing that we heard 20 years ago. So we can't get complacent. And we would like to, in some ways, think that we can move on to new initiatives and new challenges and new permeations of what choice may look like. But to take this for granted, to assume that charters are safe, I think is a mistake. And so, yes, I'm optimistic, but I'm optimistic because of the people that are in this room and the people that are in the movement.
Nora, that same question to you. I'm trying to walk in your shoes now, but I know how hard it is to serve the charter movement, and I know how hard the work in the trenches is running charter schools. What strengths do you believe that the Colorado Charter Movement brings that are unique, distinctive to Colorado?
It's these people. I think this is really the strength of the movement is in this room, and I'm going to go back to something that Jason said. I think the strength in the movement is also our parents and our kids, and it's again where I do believe that sometimes we are our own worst enemy and not actually working with our parents and our communities more. I think that we've spent 25 years talking about choice. And in an earlier session, we're talking about the idea that when parents make a choice to go to a school, a charter school in this case, when a parent makes a choice to go to a charter school, they are going to be satisfied because otherwise they've not done a good job as a parent. So they will be satisfied. But satisfaction in being in your schools is a very low bar. They should be enthused about being in your school. They should feel like your school is the best fit for their child. They should feel like their child is known and belongs in the school. And I think we underestimate the power of the parents in our schools. I think we underestimate the power that we have in our communities to actually become community hubs to serve more than just our schools. So I think the strength of us can also be seen as one of the things we are not taking advantage of. And I think that's our ability to actually be a true community leader instead of just being so insular. We are so nose to the grindstone in our schools that we don't take enough time to look up and out. And I think it is actually one of our strengths that we're mission-driven organizations, but I think we underestimate the power of our parents and our kids.
I've heard that a lot from school leaders the last 9 months, that they feel like oftentimes they're on an island and they're looking to the league to feel part of a movement.
Right.
But one of our strengths is that we're a movement, but not if we don't give energy to the movement. Jim, do you see it as a weakness that 86% of Colorado charter schools are authorized by school districts?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you. You know, Terry's an optimist, and there was a group that tried to start a pessimist club. The problem was nobody thought it'd work.
He's trying, y'all.
I'll candidly say there was a time. There was a time when I thought school districts should not be allowed to authorize schools. That's not just Colorado, that's anywhere. And why was because I was a disciple of the original charter idea, which Ted Coldery spoke about as the state needed to take away the exclusive franchise. And what he meant by that was that the only group that had authority to run a public school in a location was the school district. And that the state is the body that created districts and gave them the authority to do that. And if you're the only group that can run a public school, we'd call that a monopoly. I would say I've evolved. I see places where districts are doing a good job. I see places where districts are doing a bad job. I think the function of authorizing comes down to several different things. One of them is competence, but the other is will. And I would not want to be in a forced marriage. When the district is hostile to the charter and it's a forced marriage, I don't think that's a good idea. But when the district sees that part of their role is to raise up public education in the community and they can have a healthy relationship, I think that's a good thing.
Jason, do you think that we need to create more pathways to authorization to make it easier to open charter schools? Or potentially to create more alternative authorizers?
Yes.
Excellent. I love how concise that was, especially after your 2-response answer earlier.
I can elaborate if you like.
Thank you for that generous offer. Why don't you go ahead with that?
I mean, I think it's clear. I think exclusive chartering authority in the hands of the district is limiting. They act in their interests, and unfortunately, they see their interests as protecting what they know, the status quo. And if the status quo was awesome, I'd want them to protect that. And where it is awesome, I still think on principle, families deserve choice. They deserve the full spectrum of choice because what the district offers and prescribes is not necessarily what's best for the education of children and best for every family. So there has to be options, therefore there has to be a pathway, there has to be a mechanism for exercising those options. So yes, there needs to be alternative pathways to authorization in the form of we are certainly glad that CSI is in the mix and has some authority to authorize school, but it has to be something even beyond that. We need to get together as a community. We need to figure out the best practices. We need to figure out a strategy. We need to put together the advocacy power to push forward. We have to evaluate the political dynamics of that and do it smartly. Let's not rush in with some sort of policy that's dead on arrival. But let's be smart about it. Let's be methodical about it, and let's find the best way to expand pathways for great schools to open and operate.
I'm going to go to Jim for a follow-on, and then Terry. It's hard to leave Terry out of this conversation entirely. Jim?
So I led Central Michigan University's charter school operations. So we were a university authorizer. We had statewide authority. When I left, we had about 60 schools that served 35,000 students for perspective. But the thing that unites us in this room is choice. And so if we believe choice is good for students and families, we also need to believe that choice is good for schools and authorizers. And whether you use your choice or not, it's powerful to have one.
I'm sorry, I got to jump in. But Jim, that pains me a little bit because Michigan's not the ideal environment where you see poor quality authorizers who have this authority and get to keep it, and they have so any university, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe any university can authorize in the state of Michigan. That becomes a revenue generator for them. They're authorizing some terrible schools. They're stacking bad charter schools next to other bad charter schools. So I don't believe in a full-fledged, unregulated authorization environment either. I want quality authorizing. That's what I'm talking about.
Wow. That was kind of a different tone that you took there. But I appreciate that. We're going to mix it up a little today. Jim, do you want to respond to that before we go to Terry?
Sure. I think he got the union talking points. But in all seriousness,
It's about to get real.
it's a real issue,
okay.
right?
The women will keep things civil.
If I can just share, sounds a bit braggadocious, but when I was at Central Michigan University, we'd been audited by the state. We were told that we didn't provide any oversight and accountability, and that we couldn't document it. It became largely a paperwork exercise. I came in, the auditors came back, we got referenced as being the gold standard, not only by the State Department of Ed, but by the U.S. Department of Ed. Because you're a university authorizer doesn't make you good, because you're a district authorizer doesn't make you bad. It's what you do. And there are points where charter schooling has impacted the status quo to a point that it's almost put districts out of business. In my home state, it's the city of Detroit. The theory of change was that choice and competition would cause people to improve, ask why their students are leaving, and do things to get better. That's really sounded good. I thought that would work. 25 years later, I would tell you that people go through different stages of grieving. And some just put their heads in the sand and fail to change. And you can see what happens. They lose over half their students.
I want some more, Terry. Allow it, but if we need to move on.
Let's keep moving on. Although I did appreciate the push. Terry?
Well, I'm going to go back to Colorado. Maybe we can hit Michigan a little bit later. We know that choices does not exist really at the authorizer level, because out of 178 school districts, 8 do not have ECA. ECA is easy to get. It's not that easy to lose. And the districts that don't have ECA right now, 4 are districts that are under 3,000 that are very small. And the 4 that don't have it, like Poudre doesn't seem to care, Roaring Fork doesn't seem to care, although they're talking about maybe caring soon. So it's not something that's all that important to them. So there's not real choice at the authorizing level. We know that in Colorado. Should there be? Absolutely. No different than anything else. If we want better authorizing, we should have a competitive market for it. And we should make sure that we're providing that. The other thing to think about is when we talk about schools wanting choice, we don't stop to think that this is actually advantageous for many districts. Half of our portfolio consists of schools that are transferred to us, or almost have transferred to us. That means the district, in those cases, in most cases, have said, go forth school, and go to CSI. Many of our new schools, because ECA is so limiting, are because the district said, go to CSI. There are advantages to districts to not have it be in the authorizing business. They may not have the capacity and they may not have the interest, and at times they may have a financial advantage. But the bottom line is we always think about this authorizing as just from the school level, but there are advantages at the district level as well. And so we need to think about ECA a lot differently. We want to think about how if we're going to have successful schools and they're going to be charters, that a decent authorizer or a very good authorizer increases the chances of the success of that school than in a hostile environment like Jim talked about, or in one where you spend all your time fighting the authorizer as opposed to doing the work of being a successful school. And so I think around authorizing choice is critical, competition is key, and we see it also with charters and the impact that it's had on the communities that they serve. It has risen the bar, and I would argue that we should be doing that for authorizing as well.
We're going to let that be the last word on authorizing for the moment. Nora, how are Colorado charter schools performing, and what can be done to elevate their performance?
So I'm going to go back to this idea of the definition of quality, because I think based on a singular state test, I think we have some schools that are definitely underperforming. If you think about in Colorado, that green performance band, I'm going to be honest, I don't think there is any school that should not be in that green band or higher. Like, I just think what parents expect out of us as the floor in sending their children to us is that the children are going to academically succeed. That's the floor of what they expect from us. So I don't think there should be any charter school in the state, honestly, that is not performing in at least the performance range. That said, I'll go back to again saying I think we have schools, and you know that in that performance band, low green and high green can mean very different things. But I think we have to get very good at our own data collection also around those things that are mission driven for us, and the formative assessments that we use, and other measurements, because I think right now we're all over the map. But I think for the most part, and to your point about some of the highest performing schools in the state are charter schools, I have a great interest also in what kind of people we're raising, as well as what kind of test scores we're achieving. So I think that's another thing that we have to think really clearly about, is that definition of quality.
Nora, if you were encouraging charter schools to be more innovative, how would you define innovation? What does it look like in this next chapter of chartering?
I think parents deserve not just choice, but parents deserve choices. I think parents' aspirations for their kids vary greatly. It can depend within the family and different children within the family. So I think parents really deserve choices, not just choice, in the next 25 years. So what I would love to see is for developing groups, for instance, and we in the charter community, to look across the community in which we are located, the community we serve, and try to actually think about the choices that are available to parents. And I think we've got some pretty innovative models in this room. I think that if you think about what employers are looking for in the next generation of worker, again, you're hearing a broken record up here because I can say this now, that it is beyond just test scores. We're looking at independence and critical thinking and capability and things like that. So I think the innovative school models I would like to see would be schools that actually focus on the whole child, the whole learner, that are academically performing, but that also really work with kids and families on what they're going to be as the ideal young adult.
Jim, I think there's been a tendency in the charter school movement over the last 8 or 10 years to try to define innovation quite conservatively as proven best practice that will yield higher student achievement results. How do you think about innovation in the next chapter of the charter?
Well, let's start with doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results is called insanity. So innovation is doing things differently. It's allowing different people to do things differently. And I think, again, that's back to the heart of the charter idea. But the idea doesn't guarantee, quote, quality schools. And so, is a Montessori school innovative? No, Maria Montessori existed long ago. But in a particular community that's never had it, it might be extremely innovative. So I think one of the things that the league can do is create an environment that's welcoming and encouraging to talent, to capital, to innovation, to ideas. I would argue that what a great building leader does is acts as a buffer so the teachers can stay focused on teaching and learning with kids. I think what a great league does is help create a buffer so that you can do the work that you do as schools and authorizers.
Thanks for the shout out. We have less than 5 minutes remaining in our panel exchange here before we open it up to Q&A. Oh, Jason, you're whispering to Nora that you want me to ask you an innovation question?
Desperately want to answer the innovation question.
Okay, hit it.
All right, I'm sneaking 2 answers real quick. Structure and substance. On the structure side, I don't think charter schools have gone far enough in utilizing the autonomy that they have. I don't understand why charter schools feel compelled to adopt the salary step arrangement that traditional schools do. That should be innovative. There are examples, one here in Aurora, Academy for Advanced Learning, who are paying their teachers, some of their teachers, $80,000. They can do that because they've gotten rid of the step system and they've hired some lower cost learning coaches to supplement what the great teachers are doing. So innovate that. Innovate the school day. Not just extend the school day, but actually innovate the school day. Infuse technological platforms, the ones that make sense, not just handing a kid an iPad, not just handing them a Google Chrome laptop, but actually embedding the technology into the learning process in smart ways. That's structural innovation. Substantive innovation. I believe in full-fledged individualized learning. There is not a reason, there is not a justifiable reason we can't tailor education to the individual needs of every single student right now. We have the technological supports, we have the know-how, what we don't have is the will. So there's structural changes we can make and there's substantive changes we can make, but I think innovation is the way forward and charter schools are in a unique position with the autonomy to do it. Let's do it.
That was positively fiery. I like it. Terry, to you with this next question. There's a growing national conversation about the concept of saturation. That we already have so many charter schools that we don't need more. How do you look at this issue?
I think, is that fake news, this saturation? You speak of this saturation. It is about what communities want and what communities need. And if they want charter schools, there should be charter schools there. If there's not a need or a desire for more charters in that community, then so be it. But to say that we're reaching a certain percentage, if you're in Brighton, if you're in 27J and 20% of your students are in charters, or Douglas County where 20% of your students are in charters, does that mean we shouldn't get to 25 or we shouldn't get to 30%? If there's a community need and we have people that want to start charter schools, then so be it. I think we also need to think about different options besides charters. We obviously, this is a League of Charter School conference, and we want to support charters.
That's like heretical.
I know. But we need to think about what does choice look like and what do new public school options look like. And I wouldn't want to put a number on that. I would want to encourage our communities to continue to find within them the passion to start schools, the passions to be innovative. A long time ago, way back 20 years ago, We had individual negotiations with every staff member in a charter school. It was unheard of to have salary schedules. We started with, we're going to do something very different, and we're going to have an individual negotiation with every person, every staff member here at this charter. And then we kind of slipped into, over the years, into kind of falling into some of the systems and the processes that districts use. And we found that it was easier, and I didn't have to argue with as many people. But the reality is we've lost some of that innovation, but that doesn't mean we've lost it as a community, as Coloradoans, that we want to have better options for our students. And we need to make sure that we are encouraging for those that are coming after us, that we don't, again, I'm going to say complacent. There are more choices, and we should continue to build new schools and expand and replicate the ones that are successful. And so I don't think there is a saturation point.
We're going to close out with this final question, Stan. Jim, what threats do you see to the continued growth and impact of the charter movement in Colorado?
People in this room that can't put their differences aside to get along around core functions, that you believe in choice, that you believe in opportunities, that you believe that people can have different types of schools with different types of educational philosophies that different types of parents can pick for their kids. There's a natural tendency for us to centralize and move towards command and control. It's neater, it's cleaner, it's less messy. I liken the American idea of self-governance by the people, of the people, for the people. It's messy. It's not perfect. It's an ideal. But so is the charter idea. And I think that's the real risk, is that can we stay focused on what unites us or what divides us? You often think about traditional school system and we joke about the ABCs. There's a group for everything. Do charters head that same way? Or do we stay united around some of the core functions that create an environment that allow everybody to have those choices?
Nora, what threats do you see to the continued growth and impact of the charter movement in Colorado?
I think it's our silence. I think we've lost the zeal of a movement. I think we need to celebrate more the things that are going on in our individual schools, in our communities, instead of just focusing on the top performing schools. Alleluia, and yes, we should celebrate them, but we each need to be more present in our communities, because I think our quiet, our silence allows people to come at us. I think they will find the chink in the armor, and if you can't really be a public voice for charters and for your own individual charter, you have to be public. So I think the threat is our silence.
Any final comments on threats? Terry, Jason?
I have one. You remember the movie The Hunger Games?
Yes.
Katniss is going up, and Haymitch says to her, Katniss, remember who the real enemy is. The real enemy isn't those that are bad-mouthing us. Our real enemy is ignorance. And we have to keep our eye on that.
Terry, ladies first.
Oh, thank you. I agree with what Jim just said. I agree with, what Nora just said in terms of us just being silent, and we have to continue to push. We have to continue to have our voice heard. We have to push our legislators and push our stakeholders. We have to get folks into our buildings. I know that kind of takes away from the work that you're trying to do in the classroom when you're trying to reach academic achievement, and all we're worried about is having stakeholders. But if we don't become part of the conversation, if we're not part of the conversation with accurate information and not the misinformation that's out there, then we're not doing ourselves a service, and we're going to find it's going to come back and get us. We have to make sure that those that are in decision-making roles know what's going on in our schools. And again, much what's been talked about up here, it's not just the state assessments. It's also you're a mission-driven school, that you're using mission-driven measures to look at the success of your school, and that you're sharing that information with those that are not just in your school, but those in your broader community.
Thank you. Jason, I'll give you closing remark here.
I would say that if I look outside of this room, the threat that I would see that is pervasive is ideological divisiveness. We are sadly a divided country with far-ranging issues that really hit home and people are really passionate about and just can't seem to come to terms. When I look inside of this room, I have hope because I see the opposite. I'm literally looking at Democrats, I'm looking at Republicans. What up, Luke? And there's probably some devout independents like me as well. And so I like that we can all come to the table on the basis of education quality and choice and be in unison. We can sing from the same songbook, at least on this issue. So that's the hope that I see, and I hope that what we all walk away from this conference with is a sense to just lean in all the more, put political, ideological divisiveness to the side, and let's really, truly do what most people talk about doing and really doesn't reflect in their actions, which is doing what's best for kids. I think we are positioned and poised to be the truth of that, where too many times it's just rhetoric. So let's actually go out there and do it. Let's make decisions based on what's best for kids and families.
Okay, we're going to open it up to audience Q&A. We want to hear from you. We don't want to hear platitudes, however. We want to hear questions. So we have one runner, Lorna Beckett, ready to go. We're going to get another microphone into Dan Schaller's hands. He'll be ready to go as well in a moment. Who has a question that they want to pose to the panel? And if you'd like, you could specify the panelist that you're posing the question to. If you'd like to just pose it to the panel in general, that's fine too.
And tell us who you are.
Thank you. First of all, great panel. Loved it. My name is Amber Reichgott Young. I am from Minnesota, another Minnesotan. I'd like to talk first about, if I could, a comment about something going on in Minnesota currently and then tie it to the origins. But the thing and the question I have is there opportunity here, as there has been in Minnesota, for having union-initiated charter school authorizers, where you can focus on teacher-powered and teacher-led schools? That has been a success in Minnesota. Perhaps it can be done here. And that's something that brings together the districts and the charters. Now, tying this back to the origins, if I may, because Ben and a few others of us are from Minnesota, right? So the origins are this. You said that 86% of the districts are authorizers here in Colorado, is that right?
86% of charter schools are authorized by districts, but only 43 of 178 districts are authorizers.
All right, so here's what I want to say, is that when the original law was passed in Minnesota, only districts could be authorizers, and it did not work. And what happened is that the school boards became a gatekeeper. And of the first 9 applicants, 7 were denied. And the only 2 that got through was one that was a special needs school for students of hard of hearing and deaf. And the other was a school where they had dropped out so that there wasn't a competition with the district. And we had to go back and amend that law in Minnesota to allow appeals to the state board and then future authorizers. So to your question about the authorizers, I would want to respond from the Minnesota experience that it's okay to have district authorizers as long as there's an alternative. And that, I think, is just critical. And I'm not sure there's a question in there, but there was in the first one. We support that.
That was positively cute. I think I'm going to give first response to that question to Jim Goenner. Jim, the question about how would we best engage the unions potentially in serving as authorizers or in running union-managed charter schools. How do you look at that issue?
Quite simply, the right to organize is that of the employees. And if they choose to do that, there's a process. If they choose not to do it, there isn't. I think the key is that we're trying to move away from us versus them relationships and focus on kids. And the less it's about the adults and power struggles and the more it's about kids and their learning, the better off we are.
Any other response to that question? Anyone want to jump in? Okay, let's move to the next.
Hello, Eric Hall. Eric Hall's my name.
We can hear you, Eric.
Great, thank you. So my question is, what are the best mechanisms for closing poor charter schools?
Best mechanisms for closing poor charter schools. Terry, first response.
Well, we've had some experience with that at CSI, recent closure last year. Best mechanisms, I think you're gonna have to hold your schools accountable. You can use the state accountability clock, but at the end of the day, the authorizer's job is to ensure that schools are successful and they're high quality. If they are not, then you have to make that decision, and you have to make it in a timely fashion so it's doing what's right for that community. We have seen closures go awry. We are still working with this closure that has caused us all kinds of heartache and the community heartache. So you have to approach this with a professionalism and a sensitivity to what's going to happen to these students and where are they going to go. But you should not shy away from doing it. CSI has closed several schools over the years, and some have been good and some have not been good. I think, again, it's a matter of working with that school to say, this is our reality, the school will close, but how do we do this in a way that's best for students? Always put the students first. I know that sounds so simple, and that does sound like a platitude, but it's pretty darn hard to make work. It's about the relationship you have with that school and you coming to an agreement that there needs to be a closure. And how are we going to do that? And that, I mean, in August from that year is going to close to September to October, and helping them find, those families find an alternative school that's best going to meet the needs of that student.
Terry, I have a follow-on question for you, which is that there are two primary accountability agents in charter schools. One agent is the authorizer, the other agent is parents. When you have a school that the authorizer believes is failing, but you have a strong, loyal following of parents who are committed to that school, which accountability agent should prevail? How does that work?
Oh, you're really putting me on the spot with some folks in this room, huh? Thanks, Ben. So I think we have a really good example of that with a school that's currently in our portfolio. We have a school that started and they really have gotten off to a rocky road to the point where we issued a notice of revocation. This school has turned it around because I believe that school success is about the collection of the individuals that are at that school. And when they realized how significant their issues were, financial, operational, and academic, they knew something had to change. So did the authorizer come in and say we were going to do something? Yes. Did the community, the parents, the governing board, and the staff turn that school around in a very short period of time? Yes. So I think that it is a two-way street. It is both, the authorizer has to be very clear on what the expectations are and hold that school accountable, but at the same time, the parents can change the outcome of that school. The parents can change the course of where that school is going. That school now has, in the course of 3 months, has turned around their finances, their operations, and they have brought people back from their community because you know what? The community wants that school, and they've made the difference. So it is a both end.
Wow, what a great example. And so the authorizer is creating transparency, it's elevating awareness, it's removing excuses, but it's also letting parents act. It's equipping them to act in situations where parents maybe aren't aware of the school's failure.
Ben, can I add?
Yeah, Jim, to you.
So I want to add two components to this that I think may be helpful. So one brings tears to my eyes. I had to close a school, the first, long story short, the founder had introduced Governor Engler at the Republican National Convention in San Diego in 1996. 1998, I'm closing the school. And they came up to protest. And this little girl in her uniform, had to be 5, 6-year-old, looked at me and said, "Mr. Goenner, why are you closing my school?" And all of the facts and all the data and all the due diligence we had did not matter at all. There was no way to explain it to her. But we say put kids first. I struggled big time with if I close that school, were they going to go somewhere better? We've come a long way. There are more schools. I can answer in most cases, close the school, they're going somewhere better. Point one. Point two. When I closed a school, I used the analogy that it was dropping the nuclear bomb. And there's a lot of fallout and a lot of casualties with the nuclear bomb. We learned from that experience that we could do surgical strikes. You could put a missile down a silo. And you could take out the adults that were doing the waste, fraud, and abuse, and you didn't have to disrupt all the kids. So I think there are lessons that we've learned over 25 years of how to do this. The best way to close a charter school would have all the parents go in a better one.
I'll jump in super quick, promise. Okay. It's an ethical dilemma and an unfair question. It's an ethical dilemma because to Ben's point, yeah, there are two contingents there, and guess what? Parents don't always send kids to a school because for academic reasons alone. That could be the safe place that they wouldn't otherwise have. And guess what? That's valid. You want your kids to be safe, but they're safe physically in a failing school. That's an ethical dilemma. What do you do about that? It's a very difficult question to answer, but at the end of the day, what is the institution for? It's to teach children, to teach the students the things they need to know, both out of the books and certainly some life lessons and character and stuff, but they have to be educating kids. If they're not, that's not a school, and we can't call it that. It's an unfair question because we don't get to ask that question of the traditional schools when they're chronically failing. Not just for years, for generations. And no one and they don't have to face the question about closure. Very rarely does it ever happen. So it's a very good question, and one that, as you can see, we all struggle to answer.
Hi, I'm Alex Medler with CACSA and the National Charter Schools Resource Center. I have a question for Nora, but I think Ben could talk to it as well. I think one of the underappreciated things in Colorado nationally is the role of our core knowledge schools and the network and the ability of communities to create schools based on the core knowledge model, but do it themselves. And I'm curious, Nora, in your current work and looking forward, if we can develop the kind of materials and support that we use for core knowledge schools in Colorado for other models and types, and could the league play a role in developing that background and material? Because there's no other state in the country that has 45, 60 schools with a particular model that communities are implementing so well. What do you think?
So I'm sorry, so the question is about whether there can be materials and supports created for that.
For other models. So let's say
for
we've done
other
that well
models.
with core knowledge in Colorado.
Got it.
But people want Montessori, they want expeditionary learning, they want these other pieces. Could we create the kind of infrastructure that helps communities do that themselves rather than relying on CMOs and EMOs to do it for them?
Right.
As we respond to this question, let's keep something in mind. When Bill Bennett served as chair of K-12 Inc., he hired a director from the Core Knowledge Foundation to develop the curriculum for K-12 Inc.'s virtual schools. John Holdren, the individual who took that job, worked for 8 years helping K-12 Inc. build its virtual model. We know how K-12 is performing generally. So I just want us to think about this in terms of what we're seeing. But Terry, frankly, that question was addressed to you.
Was it?
I think it was.
Pretty sure he said Nora.
It was Nora.
Oh, he said Nora.
He said Nora. It's okay, Alex.
Excuse me, Alex. Nora, do you have more you'd like to say?
So I think this goes back to one of the premises of charter schools being based on research-driven curricular models, right? It's kind of coming from that. I mean, I think, yeah, there are a lot of models that have a lot of supports that one could rely on if as a community, I think if as a community you are identifying a particular model, Montessori being one of them, expeditionary learning being one of them, Waldorf being one of them, if you're talking about other models beyond core knowledge, there are a lot of national and international support organizations that can do that. I think the New Schools Office, honestly, at the League is a great resource for leading them to resources. I think I would struggle with how much support the League can give for individual models across so many different pedagogical models that are available. I think we also are seeing more and more, and I don't mean it to say at all that it's a jigsaw puzzle, but it is kind of a jigsaw puzzle where some of our, especially high schools, are looking at research-based pedagogical models and are putting them together into a model that is a more collaborative approach to education. But I think there are a lot out there. I think one of the things that I would see is that parents often don't know what they don't know. So when you're working with a community, and let's say again, we'll use the new schools office at the league, when they have a group of parents who approach them because they want to start a charter school in the area, they often have this vague sense of what they want for their children. I think that is something that an organization like the league absolutely should be able to do. Lead them to resources, lead them to other models, get them out into your schools to get them to see the schools that seem to be aligned with what their aspirations are as parents. I don't know if that helps.
Do we have another question? Lady in red in the back? Who else do we have?
Hi, my name is Kate Mullins, and given over the past 2 decades, the charter community has changed quite a bit in terms of being standalone charters to seeing the expansion of CMOs. I'm just wondering, where do you think CMOs, or what role do you see CMOs playing in the future of the charter landscape nationally and in Colorado? And then what role, if any, do you see the league and authorizers playing in ensuring that there's equitable support for charters, whether they be a standalone grassroots charter or the expansion of a CMO?
That is a great question. I'm the moderator, so I don't have to answer any of them. Who wants to answer this?
I'll take it.
Nora?
I'll take it.
Irresistible, right?
Yeah. I think it has to be a both and. Like, I think there is certainly a place for charter management organizations. And some of the charter management organizations that are in here started as singular schools and then were encouraged, often by communities, to replicate or expand into nearby communities. So I think there absolutely is that place for any of you in here who are knocking it out of the park, and that's a lot of you, who are knocking it out of the park with your charter model. I think the biggest thing is being responsive to the community, and not for those of us in positions of power to have the hubris to decide what a community needs or wants. But if it is an authentic community process that has been looking for something for their community, they see an existing model that seems to work well, it is their choice, and that organization, that school, has the propensity to actually expand, I think that's absolutely spot on. But we cannot lose the community-driven models of standalones. When I was at the league, I could remember we tried to get a singular campus school to replicate because they were so great, and their response was, no, we're good. You know, we're fine. We want to be a really good 500-student school, and we're really not interested in replicating. And so I think there has to be a both and, but I think the biggest key is being responsive to the community.
I just want to quickly add to that. My advice, don't bite the bait. There are those that put that bait out there and try to drive that wedge and try to sow seeds of discord between the CMOs and the mom and pop schools. And I just want all of us to rise above the fray, not get into that dirty, messy battle with them, because we're here for the right reasons. We're here on principle, and that's just a tactic to kind of divide and weaken us. So I don't want to have any arguments about CMOs versus small, organic mom and pop schools. I think both and.
I'm going to just add on one brief question for Terry on this one, which is that we have a number of CMOs, Terry, that are just beginning to cross district boundary lines and are looking for efficient, effective ways to have authorization as they build out networks of schools, CMOs. How do you, what's your viewpoint on that relative to CSI's authorizing?
I'm glad you asked the question. I was just thinking about that. We have talked to several networks and CMOs that are interested in expanding outside their district into a different district. Obviously, having one single authorizer is be much preferred, much easier. You can do it if you're Keith King. I don't know if Keith's in the room, but there's Keith. He went into many districts and was able to do Colorado early colleges.
You just get your own special law passed.
Right, yeah, I was gonna say, just become Keith King and you can make it happen. He even convinced APS to do that. So I would say that we are supportive. We have talked to networks that want to do this. It's usually an eye-opening experience to talk to CMOs that are crossing from DPS into a different district about the financial impact it's going to have on their district, or excuse me, their school. We would, again, like to see more opportunities for networks and CMOs to expand and have the option of having CSI as their authorizer. Having multiple authorizers, and there are some schools in here that are doing that. James Irwin has several, and it's operationally a challenge. As I always say, you need to look at the financial, the operational, the contractual, and the political. And if you had all your schools that had the same, somewhat of the same, because you're going to have different PPR, but you're dealing with the same finance system, you also have the same operational issues and expectations, that contractually, that it would be similar. You wouldn't have very different contracts from district to district. And then politically, where you don't have to fight what the political changes could be in a district as you cross district lines. If you're a DPS school and you're looking to go to some other district, if it was Adams 14, a very different political world that you're going to enter into. So you get my vote on changing that at the state level. Could you work on that?
Couldn't escape getting an assignment.
Put it in the strategic plan.
We have just a few minutes left. Additional questions, sir?
So my name's Ken Griffith, and I've been involved in a lot of startup charter schools since '94, most of them here in Colorado. And I think following up on the last several questions, actually, I think there is, I agree, a role for both the CMO, EMOs, and the mom and pop startups. Like with the Core Knowledge and others, the non-CMO, EMO. So when I've been before a district authorizer, there's a panel of 12 to 14 specialists, this risk management, ELL, special ed, and they ask you the gotcha questions, right? So the mom and pop shop have no chance. And I'm guessing if we look at the denied charters in Colorado, most of them are going to be mom and pops. The CMO, EMOs are the ones that have the resources to be able to answer those questions and have the specialists already in their team. So there's a lot of barriers, I guess is my point, to getting in, and we all need to support any of them that are helping create more charters. Are there incubators, or are there opportunities for incubators for the mom and pop shops to continue? Because one of my fears are the EMO and CMOs are great, but the innovation, they continue to make their model. And so we risk the innovation by not having incubators out there for the mom and pop shops.
So do we have incubator programs for freestanding school founders? Nora, to you.
There actually are some of those. Some of you may know Moonshot, which is Christine De Leon has an organization that helps to incubate new leaders for innovative school models. The League actually does a good job. The League's New Schools Office does a good job of really supporting. They have a boot camp. They have a group. It's almost like a 12-step program for new school developers. But yeah, there are some, and I think that is in fact becoming more and more popular, is thinking about this cohort of people who can go through that. We were just saying, it's also true, I think, we do have the ability to appeal at the state board. So while some of our independent schools, the schools that are starting as community-based schools are denied by a district, this is, I think, one of the reasons we have to have that appeals process at the state board level it's in contention, because they are often overruled because of those very reasons. It's not intended to be a gotcha. And so I think we have a bit of protection there when they appeal to the state board.
So if you're not a recovering addict in need of a 12-step program, but are just dying to get one, come to the boot camp at the New Schools Development Program at the League. We'll take one more question, then we're going to shut her down and go to reception. Any out there? Dan, are you dying to ask a question? Lorna, you have a question? Any League board members want to ask any hard-hitting final questions? Looks like we got one. All right, Gary.
Steuven. I have seen over the years a dearth of quality leadership in the public education realm. And charter schools, unfortunately, I believe, are not immune to that. What can the League do, or what can anything be done to raise the level across the board for leadership in our schools today?
Oh, great closing question. So we've had a dearth of quality leadership in public education at large. What can the League do to address that gap?
Boss.
Remember, I'm the moderator. Who wants to answer this?
Well, I just believe that there's power in numbers. One, I think we've got some schools that are doing a really great job of a succession planning kind of thing where they're actually building a pipeline of leaders from within your own schools. So I think one of the things we have to do from within is identify our proteges. Identify those people coming up who we think really have the leadership chops to be able to run a charter school. The other one is, raise your hand if you're a board member. Will you please support your school leaders? I think that's another one. It's a thankless job. You know, it's really, really hard. So I think our charter school boards need to have the guidance to really support your school leader and make sure that they have what they need to run a really good school. I think we have to have succession planning and whatever that looks like with a pipeline within your own school, because you know your best people. And that does not always mean taking the best teachers out of the classroom. Right? It can also mean just nurturing from without. And then I would go back to having another 12-step program. I would have another, you know.
I'm pretty sure Lori knows how to create one if you want one. Dan Schaller is going to close this out with an advocacy proposal, and then we're going to go to applause. Dan?
Yeah, so I know it's been a long day, and I'm the last thing standing between you and the reception, so I'll keep this very quick. But I couldn't have asked for a better lead-in from what some of the panelists were talking about in terms of parent power and in terms of the need to make sure we're continuing to mobilize and remain active. So if I could ask the tech folks in the back of the room to pull up a quick map. I have one quick ask for you. It should only take about a minute. Many of you are familiar with our COCAN network, our Colorado Charter Advocacy Network. We are working to expand this and to bolster it. And while we've traditionally operated a lot of email addresses, we're looking to incorporate cell phone numbers and additional contact information. And so before you head off to the reception, my last ask of you today is to go pull out your cell phone and quickly text the letters COCAN to 52886 so that we can incorporate you into our system. As you do that, you'll see your pin pop up with your location on the map here of Colorado. I'd love to see how many additional pin drops we can get to pop up there on the screen before you leave here today. And then be on the lookout, as you're doing that, be on the lookout for additional requests from us to help activate your parent communities. That is where our real power lies with the more than 120,000 families that now attend charter schools. We have just recently hired a new associate director of organizing at the League, Brandon Helwig, who is right over here. Stand up, Brandon. Yes. His first day was yesterday, so he's getting a crash course in the League and in charter schools. But we recognize how important it is to make sure we're very intentional about the grassroots organizing and making sure that all the parents and supporters of charter schools in Colorado are marching in the same direction. So please, if you can, before you leave, text this number and then be on the lookout for additional opportunities for organizing engagement in the coming weeks. Thank you very much.
Dan, can we guarantee that these texts are safe, secure, no advertising response?
Great question. We are very judicious and responsible about the use of this, and we will make the promise to you that we will not oversaturate you with information. We will only use it as necessary. As different things come up that threaten charter school autonomy, as opportunities for additional resources and revenue come down the pipeline, we will be very responsible with our use of this information.
Thank you, Dan. It's time to give our panelists a round of applause for the great job they've done.